There's a particular kind of blindness that comes with privilege. Not the inability to see, but the refusal to look. Marcus Whitfield had perfected this art for 42 years. He built empires, crushed competitors, and lived by one unspoken rule. Some people simply didn't belong in his world. And then, one Tuesday evening, in a ballroom filled with Manhattan's elite, he saw a woman who would force him to confront every lie he'd ever told himself about who deserved a seat at his table. This isn't a fairy tale. It's the story of a man who had to lose everything he thought mattered to discover what actually did. Stay with me, because what happened next changed not just his life, but exposed a truth about power, prejudice, and the quiet ways we exclude people without ever saying their names out loud. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Marcus Whitfield wasn't born into wealth, and perhaps that's what made him so ruthless about keeping it. His father had been a factory foreman in Pittsburgh, the kind of man who came home with oil under his fingernails and pride in his chest. Marcus learned early that the world respected one thing: results. By 25, he'd earned his MBA from Wharton. By 30, he'd launched Whitfield Capital, a venture firm that turned failing companies into gold mines. By 40, he was worth north of $300 million and had a reputation that preceded him into every room he entered. People who worked with Marcus described him the same way: brilliant, exacting, and utterly devoid of sentimentality. He didn't do favors, he didn't believe in second chances, and he certainly didn't let emotions cloud his judgment. His personal life reflected this philosophy. He'd been married once, briefly, to a woman from a similar background, someone who understood that their union was more merger than romance. It ended quietly after 3 years. No children, no drama, just a clean separation that barely made the society pages. But there was something else about Marcus that people noticed, though few spoke about it directly. His firm, his social circle, even the charities he supported, they all had a certain composition: homogeneous, familiar, safe. When pressed about diversity at a conference once, Marcus had given his standard response: "We hire the best. We don't see color, we see competence." It was the kind of statement that sounded reasonable until you looked at the actual numbers. In 15 years, Whitfield Capital had never promoted a black executive to partner level, never featured a black entrepreneur in their flagship investment portfolio. The pattern was so consistent it couldn't be accidental, yet Marcus would have been genuinely offended if anyone called it racism. In his mind, he wasn't prejudiced. He simply recognized excellence when he saw it, and excellence, apparently, looked remarkably like him. Jordan Matthews grew up in a world that taught her she'd have to be extraordinary just to be considered adequate. Her parents, both professors at Howard University, had filled their home in Northwest DC with books, expectations, and a clear message: the world will underestimate you at every turn, so you cannot afford to be anything less than exceptional. Her mother, Dr. Claudia Matthews, was a historian who specialized in Reconstruction. Her father taught economics. Dinner table conversations ranged from monetary policy to the hidden figures of the civil rights movement. Jordan absorbed it all. She graduated summa cum laude from Princeton at 21, turned down offers from Goldman Sachs and McKinsey to join a boutique consulting firm that specialized in turning around underperforming corporations. By 32, she'd earned a reputation as the person companies called when they needed someone who could see what everyone else had missed. She had a gift for reading balance sheets the way some people read poetry, finding the story beneath the numbers. Her client list included Fortune 500 companies, and her fees reflected her value. Jordan didn't walk into rooms apologetically. She'd learned early that hesitation was interpreted as incompetence, especially for someone who looked like her. She wore her natural hair in twists or a low bun, dressed in tailored suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and spoke with the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing she'd earned every single thing she had. She didn't smile to make others comfortable, she didn't soften her expertise to seem less threatening, and she absolutely did not tolerate being patronized. The Connor Foundation Gala was one of those events where Manhattan's power brokers gathered under the guise of philanthropy. Held annually at the Mandarin Oriental, it drew tech moguls, real estate developers, hedge fund managers, and the occasional celebrity seeking relevance through charity work. Marcus attended every year, less out of genuine interest in the foundation's education initiatives and more because it was expected. These events were where deals got made over cocktails and connections got solidified between courses. He arrived at 7:30, fashionably late, in a Tom Ford tuxedo that had been custom-fitted the previous week. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and carefully arranged orchids. He made his rounds methodically, shaking hands with the right people, laughing at the right jokes, projecting the image of a man completely at ease in his environment. By 8:15 he was ready to leave. He'd fulfilled his social obligations. Then he saw her. Jordan stood near the bar, speaking with another woman Marcus vaguely recognized from some tech startup. What caught his attention wasn't her beauty, though she was striking in a midnight blue gown that somehow managed to be both elegant and modern. It was the way she held herself. There was no seeking in her posture, no scanning the room for important people to impress. She looked like someone who'd been invited not as a guest, but as an equal. It irritated him immediately, though he couldn't have explained why. Marcus prided himself on knowing everyone worth knowing in New York's business community, yet he didn't recognize her. This bothered him more than it should have. He caught the attention of Richard Chen, a venture capitalist he'd known for years, and nodded toward Jordan. "Who's that?" Richard followed his gaze and smiled. "Jordan Matthews. She's the consultant Brennan Industries brought in last year. Turned their entire supply chain operation around, saved them about $40 million. She's been getting calls from everyone since then. Brilliant woman." "Why, you interested in hiring her?" Marcus made a non-committal sound. "Just curious." But he kept watching. Jordan noticed him staring. Of course she did. She'd spent her entire career being watched, evaluated, judged by men who couldn't decide if they wanted to hire her or dismiss her. She recognized Marcus Whitfield immediately. You didn't work in corporate consulting without knowing who the major players were. His firm's reputation preceded him, both for their impressive returns and their notable lack of diversity. She'd been approached twice by companies in his portfolio, and both times she'd politely declined. She had no interest in being the token hire who'd be brought out during diversity discussions and ignored during actual strategy meetings. She excused herself from her conversation and decided to handle this directly. If Marcus Whitfield wanted to stare, he could do it while actually speaking to her. She walked over with her champagne glass, stopping directly in front of him with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You've been watching me for the past 10 minutes. Either you're trying to place where we've met, or you're working up the courage to tell me I'm in the wrong venue. Which is it?" Marcus was rarely caught off guard, but her directness surprised him. Up close, she was even more striking. Not just beautiful, but present in a way that demanded attention. He recovered quickly, offering his practiced smile. "Marcus Whitfield. And no, I was simply wondering how I haven't met you before. I make it a point to know the major players in the city." Jordan extended her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. "Jordan Matthews. And perhaps we haven't met because I'm selective about which circles I enter. Not all major players are worth knowing." The subtle jab landed. Marcus felt something unfamiliar. Genuine interest. People didn't speak to him this way. "Consulting, right? I heard about your work with Brennan. Impressive turnaround." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "You've been asking about me. I asked Richard. He speaks highly of you." Richard's a good judge of talent when he bothers to look beyond his usual networks. She paused, taking a sip of champagne. "Tell me, Mr. Whitfield, does Whitfield Capital still have 0 black partners, or did you finally decide diversity might be good for business?" The ballroom noise seemed to fade. Marcus felt heat rise in his chest, that familiar defensiveness he always experienced when someone questioned his firm's composition. But something stopped him from delivering his usual response. Maybe it was the way she held his gaze, unflinching. Maybe it was the fact that she clearly didn't need anything from him. Whatever it was, he found himself answering honestly. "We promote based on merit. The best people rise, regardless of background." Jordan's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "That's a fascinating statement, because statistically, the odds of the best people always looking remarkably similar, coming from remarkably similar schools, and having remarkably similar last names, well, those odds are astronomical. Unless merit has a very specific demographic profile that I'm unaware of." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "I don't make hiring decisions based on quotas or optics. I make them based on results." "Of course you do," Jordan replied smoothly. "And I'm sure it's purely coincidental that those results consistently exclude people who don't look like you. That's not bias, that's just, what did you call it? Merit." They stood there, locked in a silent standoff that others were beginning to notice. Marcus should have walked away. He should have dismissed her as another activist with a chip on her shoulder. But he didn't. Instead, he heard himself say, "If you're so convinced my approach is flawed, perhaps you'd be willing to prove it. Dinner. Let's have an actual conversation about this, not a sparring match at a charity event." Jordan studied him for a long moment. "You want to have dinner with me to discuss your firm's diversity problems? That's either remarkably self-aware or remarkably tone-deaf, and I'm not sure which." I want to have dinner with someone who's clearly not afraid to challenge me. That's rare. Whether we discuss my firm, your consulting work, or the weather, I suspect it won't be boring. Jordan considered this. She should say no. She knew exactly what this was. A powerful man intrigued by someone who didn't immediately defer to him, curious about the challenge she represented. But she was also curious. Curious about whether Marcus Whitfield was capable of actually hearing what she had to say, or whether he'd simply perform interest while remaining fundamentally unchanged. Thursday, 7 p.m. You pick the restaurant, but make it somewhere we can actually talk, not somewhere you're trying to impress me. Marcus nodded. Done. Marcus chose Gramercy Tavern, upscale enough to show respect, but intimate enough for genuine conversation. He arrived early, something he never did, and found himself uncharacteristically nervous. He'd been on countless business dinners, but this felt different. He wasn't trying to close a deal or assess an investment. He wasn't entirely sure what he was trying to do. Jordan arrived exactly on time, dressed in a simple black dress and minimal jewelry. She looked like someone who had nothing to prove. They were seated at a corner table, and after ordering, an awkward silence settled between them. Finally, Marcus spoke. I've been thinking about what you said at the gala, about my firm's composition. Jordan set down her water glass. And I want to understand your perspective, not as a defense, but genuinely. Help me see what you see. It was the right thing to say, and Jordan recognized it as such. But she also knew that asking questions was easier than accepting answers. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me about your hiring process. Walk me through how you identify talent. Marcus described his firm's approach. Ivy League recruitment, referrals from trusted partners, a rigorous interview process focused on case studies and analytical ability. As he spoke, Jordan nodded occasionally but said nothing. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Here's what I hear, she said finally. You recruit from schools that have historically excluded people who look like me. You rely on referrals from networks that have historically excluded people who look like me. And you use evaluation criteria that reward a very specific type of presentation and communication style, one that people like me often aren't socialized to perform. Then you wonder why your firm looks the way it does, and you call it merit. Marcus started to object, but she raised a hand. I'm not finished. The insidious thing about this system is that it allows people like you to believe you're being objective. You genuinely think you're hiring the best because you're blind to how the best has been defined to exclude certain people from the start. It's not active discrimination. It's structural blindness. The dinner lasted 3 hours. They talked about bias, about opportunity, about the difference between equality and equity. Marcus found himself defending positions he'd never questioned, and Jordan systematically dismantled each defense with data, examples, and lived experience. But she wasn't cruel about it. She was patient, almost pedagogical, as if she'd had this conversation many times before and understood that real change happened slowly. At one point, Marcus admitted something he'd never said aloud. I worked incredibly hard to get where I am. I came from nothing. No connections, no family money. Everything I built myself. And there's a part of me that looks at programs like affirmative action or diversity initiatives and thinks, I didn't get any help, why should anyone else? Jordan nodded slowly. I understand that feeling. But here's the question. Did you really get no help? Did you never benefit from being seen as competent by default? Did you never walk into a room and have people assume you belonged there? Did you never get the benefit of the doubt because you reminded someone of themselves or their son or their younger self? The question landed like a physical blow. Marcus sat back, genuinely considering it for the first time. How many meetings had he walked into where his presence was simply accepted? How many times had he been given opportunities to fail upward, to learn on the job, to be mentored through mistakes? He thought about Jordan's comment about Princeton, about how she'd had to be summa cum laude to get the same opportunities he'd received with a solid 3.5 GPA. I never thought about it that way, he said quietly. Jordan's expression softened slightly. Most people don't. That's the definition of privilege. It's invisible to the people who have it. They began meeting regularly after that. What started as weekly dinners evolved into longer conversations, museum visits, walks through Central Park where they could talk without the performance of restaurants. Marcus found himself looking forward to these meetings with an intensity that surprised him. Jordan challenged him in ways no one else did. She didn't let him hide behind platitudes or comfortable narratives, but she also laughed at his jokes, debated literature and politics with genuine passion, and occasionally revealed vulnerabilities that made her seem less like an adversary and more like someone he was beginning to care about deeply. One Saturday afternoon, about 2 months into whatever this was, They were walking through the High Line when Jordan stopped suddenly, looking out over the Hudson.
Can I ask you something honestly? Marcus joined her at the railing.
Of course. When you first saw me at that gala, what did you actually think? Not the polite version, the real immediate thought. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He could lie, smooth it over, protect himself, but something about the way she asked, the vulnerability beneath the directness, made him want to be honest. I thought you didn't belong there, not because of anything you did or said, but because you didn't fit the template in my head of who belongs in those spaces. And then when you challenged me, my immediate reaction was defensiveness, like you were attacking something I'd built rather than pointing out something I'd never examined. The truth is, Jordan, I've spent 42 years in rooms where everyone looked like me, thought like me, came from backgrounds like mine, and I convinced myself that was just how excellence naturally aggregated. I never questioned whether the criteria for excellence had been designed to produce exactly that result. Jordan turned to face him fully. Do you know why I agreed to have dinner with you? Marcus shook his head. Because most people, when challenged the way I challenged you, they get defensive and shut down. But you didn't. You got uncomfortable, which meant some part of you recognized the truth in what I was saying. And I thought, maybe, just maybe, here's someone capable of actual growth. Was I right? Marcus met her eyes. I'm trying to be, but I need you to know something. This stopped being about learning or growth weeks ago. I care about you, Jordan, more than I've cared about anyone in a very long time. And I don't know what to do with that. The shift in their relationship brought new complications. As they began appearing together at events, Marcus noticed the stares, the whispered conversations that stopped when they approached. His business partners started asking questions. Richard Chen pulled him aside at a fundraiser with obvious concern. Marcus, I need to ask, what are you doing? Marcus stiffened. What do you mean? With Jordan Matthews. People are talking. They're wondering if this is serious or if you're just, I don't know, making some kind of point. A point about what exactly? Marcus's voice was cold. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Look, she's obviously brilliant and attractive, but you know how this world works. Image matters. The optics of you dating a black woman, it's going to raise questions about your judgment, your stability. Some of the limited partners are already asking if you're going through some kind of midlife crisis. Marcus felt rage building in his chest. My personal life is none of their business. Everything about you is their business. You know that. They're not just investing money, they're investing in you, in your judgment. And right now, they're questioning whether you're thinking clearly. That conversation haunted Marcus for days. He told himself it was ridiculous, that he didn't care what others thought. But he found himself withdrawing slightly from Jordan, becoming more guarded, suggesting they meet at his apartment rather than going out. Jordan noticed immediately. One evening, after he'd canceled their third public event in 2 weeks, she confronted him directly. What's happening, Marcus? And don't tell me you're just busy. He couldn't meet her eyes. There's been some talk. At the firm, some of the partners have concerns. Concerns about what? Jordan's voice was calm, but Marcus could hear the steel beneath it. About us. About how it looks. About whether it's affecting my judgment. Jordan nodded slowly, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression. Not anger, but something worse. Resignation. Let me guess. They're worried that you're with me to make some kind of statement. Or that I'm distracting you from business. Or maybe they just can't imagine that someone like you would genuinely care about someone like me without some ulterior motive. It's not like that, Marcus protested, but even he could hear how weak it sounded. Jordan stood up, gathering her things. Do you know what the cruelest thing about this is? It's not that your partners are prejudiced, it's that you're letting them be. You're letting their discomfort dictate your choices, which means their prejudice becomes yours by proxy. That's not fair, Marcus said. I'm trying to navigate a complicated situation. No. You're trying to have it both ways. You want the growth and enlightenment that comes from being with me, but you don't want to pay the social cost. You want to feel like you've evolved, but you're not willing to risk anything to prove it. Marcus felt defensive anger rising. You don't understand what's at stake. I've built something over 15 years. I have responsibilities to my partners, my investors, my employees. Jordan's laugh was bitter. And there it is, the moment where comfort wins over courage. You know what, Marcus? I'm not angry. I'm disappointed, which is somehow worse. I actually thought you might be different. She walked toward the door, then turned back. Here's what you need to understand. This was never about whether you found me attractive or interesting. That's easy. The hard part is being willing to examine every system and structure you've benefited from and actively work to change them even when it costs you something, even when it makes you uncomfortable, even when your peers question your judgment. That's what actual change looks like. And you're not ready for it. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like finality. Marcus stood alone in his apartment, the silence oppressive. He thought about calling her, about explaining that she was wrong, that he just needed time to figure things out, but he couldn't because deep down, he knew she was right. He'd let the whispers and concerns of people who mattered less than she did influence his behavior. He'd chosen comfort over courage, exactly as she'd said. For 3 weeks, Marcus tried to return to his normal life. He threw himself into work, told himself the relationship had run its course, convinced himself that Jordan was being unreasonable in her expectations. But nothing felt right. Meetings that used to energize him now felt hollow. Social events that used to feel important now felt performative. He kept replaying their conversations, seeing his business and his life through her eyes, and he didn't like what he saw. The moment of clarity came at a partnership meeting. They were reviewing candidates for a new associate position, and Marcus found himself looking at the stack of resumes with fresh eyes. All from the same 5 schools, all with the same types of internships and recommendations, all fitting the same narrow profile. When one partner suggested they reach out to their usual channels for additional candidates, Marcus heard Jordan's voice in his head. "You recruit for networks that have historically excluded people who look like me." He spoke without planning to. "We need to change our recruitment strategy." The room went quiet. Thomas Brennan, the senior partner, frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're fishing in the same pond we've always fished in, and we're surprised that we keep catching the same fish. We say we want the best talent, but we're only looking in places where certain people are likely to be. That's not a merit-based system, that's a self-replicating one." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "Is this about Jordan Matthews?" Marcus felt every eye in the room on him. This was the moment. He could backtrack, make some generic comment about diversifying their talent pool, keep things comfortable, or he could tell the truth. Yes, it's about Jordan, and it's about the fact that she's more qualified than half the people in this room. And she would never have made it past our screening process because she doesn't fit our template. It's about the fact that we've convinced ourselves we're objective when we're actually just comfortable with sameness. And it's about the fact that I've been complicit in building and maintaining a system that excludes talented people for no reason other than they don't remind us of ourselves. The reaction was swift and predictable. Thomas asked to speak with Marcus privately after the meeting. In his office, he was direct. "Marcus, I understand you've developed feelings for this woman, but you need to think carefully about what you're doing. Challenging our entire hiring approach because of a personal relationship, that's not good judgment. That's emotional thinking, and it's exactly what some of our limited partners are worried about." Marcus felt something harden inside him. "Let me ask you something, Thomas. In 15 years, how many black partners have we promoted?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "That's not a fair question. We promote based on performance." "How many?" Marcus pressed. "0. We've promoted 0 black partners. We've promoted plenty of mediocre white guys who reminded you of yourself at 25, but 0 black professionals, 0 Latino professionals, 0 partners who didn't come from the same background we did. And you're telling me that's merit? That's performance?" "You're out of line," Thomas said coldly. "No, I've been out of line for 15 years. I've been so comfortable in my success that I never questioned whether the game was rigged in my favor. Jordan made me see that, and I pushed her away because it was easier than facing the truth. But I'm facing it now. We need to fundamentally change how we identify and promote talent, or I need to leave the firm." Thomas stared at him. "You'd walk away from everything you've built over a woman you've known for 3 months?" Marcus met his eyes steadily. "I'd walk away from a system I helped create that I now recognize as fundamentally unjust. Jordan just helped me see it clearly. And yes, I care about her deeply, but that doesn't make the criticism invalid. If anything, it makes it more urgent because now I understand what we've been doing to people, not just in theory but in reality. Every time we overlook a qualified candidate because they don't look right or sound right or come from the right place, we're doing what was done to Jordan 1,000 times in her career. And I can't keep doing that." What followed was the hardest 6 months of Marcus's professional life. He pushed for immediate changes to Whitfield Capital's recruitment and promotion practices over significant resistance from other partners. He reached out to HBCUs, to professional organizations for underrepresented groups, to recruiting firms that specialized in diverse talent placement. He implemented blind resume reviews and structured interviews designed to reduce bias. He brought in consultants, Jordan's firm actually, to audit their practices and make recommendations. Some partners supported him, others left. Several limited partners pulled their funding. Marcus's net worth took a significant hit, but something unexpected happened. As they began bringing in talent from different backgrounds, with different perspectives and different approaches to problem solving, the firm's performance actually improved. They identified opportunities they'd previously missed. They built relationships with entrepreneurs they'd never have encountered through their old networks. They started getting attention not just for the returns, but for being a firm that was actually trying to change the industry's homogeneous culture. But through all of this, Marcus hadn't spoken to Jordan. He'd wanted to reach out 100 times, to tell her she'd been right, to show her what he was doing. But some part of him felt he needed to do the work first, to prove through action that he'd actually changed before asking her to believe in that change. He didn't know if she'd ever want to see him again. He'd heard her, dismissed her valid concerns, chosen his comfort over her worth, but he kept working, kept pushing, kept trying to build something better than what he'd had before. It was Jordan who reached out finally. Her firm had been hired to consult with Whitfield Capital, and she'd specifically requested to be on the team. When Marcus walked into the conference room and saw her there, his heart actually stopped for a moment. She looked exactly the same, professionally dressed, composed, but there was something different in her eyes. Less guardedness, perhaps. More curiosity. "Mr. Whitfield?" she said formally, extending her hand. "Miss Matthews." He shook her hand, feeling the familiar jolt of connection. "I didn't realize you'd be personally handling our engagement." "I wanted to see for myself," she said quietly, after the other consultants had left to review documents. "See what? If what I'd heard was true, that you actually followed through, that you weren't just performing growth for my benefit, but that you meant it." Marcus gestured to a chair, and they sat across from each other. "I meant it. Every word. You were right about everything, Jordan. About the firm, about me, about how I was choosing comfort over courage. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I let you walk away without fighting for what we had." Jordan was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know what the hardest part was? It wasn't that you had blind spots. Everyone has those. It was that when they were pointed out, you chose to protect them rather than examine them. You chose the approval of people who didn't deserve your respect over the relationship with someone who did." "I know," Marcus said, "and I can't undo that. But I can show you that I learned from it, that I'm different now because of what you taught me." They didn't resume their relationship immediately. Jordan was cautious, protective of herself in a way she hadn't been before, but they continued talking, first through the consulting engagement and then beyond it. Marcus showed her the changes at the firm, introduced her to new partners from backgrounds that would have been excluded before, shared the data on how their performance had actually improved with greater diversity of thought and experience. But more than that, he showed her he'd changed in his personal life too. He'd examined his friendships, his social circles, his assumptions about who belonged in various spaces. He'd gotten comfortable being uncomfortable, speaking up when others made prejudiced comments, using his privilege to create opportunities for others rather than just protecting his own position. One evening, about 4 months after they'd reconnected, they were having dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the West Village when Jordan said, "I need to tell you something." Marcus braced himself, unsure what was coming. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "What you've done at the firm, the risks you've taken, the comfort you've sacrificed, that takes real courage. And I'm proud of you for doing it even when I wasn't there to see it, when there was no guarantee I'd ever come back. That tells me it wasn't about winning me back. It was about actually becoming someone different." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You made me see what I couldn't see on my own. You made me better." "No," Jordan corrected gently. "I showed you where you were blind. You did the work to see. That's different and important. I can't take credit for your growth. That was your choice." They held hands across the table and Marcus said, "I know I don't deserve a second chance, but if you're willing to give me one, I promise I'll spend every day proving I was worth the risk." Jordan smiled, the first completely unguarded smile he'd seen from her in months. "Here's what I've learned. Real change doesn't happen in dramatic moments. It happens in 1,000 small choices. The choice to examine your assumptions rather than defend them. The choice to listen even when it's uncomfortable. The choice to risk something you value for something that's right. You've been making those choices for 6 months now, Marcus. That means something." 6 years later, Marcus and Jordan were married in a ceremony that brought together people from every part of their lives. Former skeptics from Whitfield Capital sat next to Jordan's family from D.C. His old partners from the firm's early days met the new, diverse team they'd built together. At the reception, Marcus gave a toast that left few dry eyes in the room. "I was 42 years old before I learned to really see. Before I understood that excellence doesn't have a single profile, that opportunity isn't evenly distributed, and that privilege is invisible to those who have it until someone loves you enough to point it out. Jordan, you could have written me off. You could have decided I wasn't worth the effort. But you gave me the gift of your honesty, your challenge, and eventually, your trust. You didn't just change my life, you changed how I see the world. And that's changed everything. Whitfield Capital was now one of the most sought-after firms for diverse talent, not because they'd implemented quotas, but because they'd fundamentally restructured how they identified and developed excellence. Their portfolio companies showed better returns, their team brought different perspectives that led to better decisions, and Marcus had become an advocate for structural change in the venture capital industry. He spoke at conferences about bias, challenged other firms to examine their practices, and used his platform to elevate voices that had historically been excluded. But perhaps the most significant change was personal. Marcus had learned that love isn't just about finding someone who makes you comfortable. Sometimes it's about finding someone who makes you uncomfortable in exactly the ways you need. Someone who sees not just who you are, but who you could become. Someone who cares enough to tell you the truth, even when it might cost them the relationship. As he danced with Jordan at their wedding, looking out at the room full of people who wouldn't have been there if he'd never met her, if he'd never chosen to see, Marcus understood that the greatest privilege of his life wasn't the wealth he'd accumulated or the companies he'd built. It was being loved by a woman who demanded he be better, and then believed he could be. So here's the question I want to leave you with. When was the last time you examined your own blind spots? When was the last time you let someone make you uncomfortable in ways that led to growth? It's easy to think prejudice is always loud and obvious, but often it's quiet, structural, and visible to those who benefit from it. The question isn't whether you have blind spots, we all do. The question is whether you're willing to see them when someone points them out, and whether you're brave enough to change what you find. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever had someone in your life who challenged you to see differently? How did you respond? And if you found this story meaningful, hit that subscribe button because we have more stories that will make you think, feel, and maybe see the world a little differently than you did before.